Hello and welcome to another video. I'm Random and today I'm going to be reading the fanfiction Alternate Perspectives from the Fallen Star series written by Boxmaker. This is a Hermitcraft SMP fanfiction with a rating of mature, and the creator chose not to use any archive warnings, though personally I'd put in graphic depictions of violence for a few scenes. The category for this fic is general, and the featured characters are Etho-slab, Vintage Beef, BOO, DogM77, Good Times with Scar, Cubfan135, Iscal85, and other original characters. There are no romantic relationships, but the featured platonic relationships are Etho-slab and Vintage Beef, BOO, Etho-slab and Vintage Beef, Cubfan135, and Good Times with Scar. The additional tags are superpowers, alternate universe superheroes/superpowers, injury, blood and injury, hijinks and shenanigans, drinking, heist, hurt comfort, non-consensual body modification, Etho-centric, oops, I gave him trauma, kidnapping, medical torture, needles. Don't worry, he'll be mostly okay in the long run. These tags make it seem dark, but I promise this is lighthearted. The summary is in the description, and now on to the story. Content warnings. Threatening with a gun. Mentions of unethical experimentation. Mentions of drinking. Chapter 12. Actions. Etho dashed backwards as the door swung open. A tall, muscular figure stood, framed in the doorway. A green, mechanical eye scanned him up and down. The man was holding a gun by his side. It wasn't pointed at Etho, but it got the point across. "Drop the knife," he said gruffly. Etho's knife clattered to the floor. "Out," the man said, stepping aside and jerking his head. Etho slowly moved forward, keeping his eyes pinned to the man at all times. The mechanical eye didn't waver as it pierced his gaze. Beef and B-dubs were arguing in his ear, but Etho was mostly ignoring their conversation. He had bigger problems to deal with. The second he was out of the bathroom, the man grabbed the back of his hoodie and led him into the kitchen, pushing him down into a chair. He didn't say a word, and Etho tried to steady his breathing. "First things first, you can turn that off," the man said, pointing to the radio wire in Etho's ear. No, don't do that," Beef protested. "Etho, what the hell is happening?" Etho hesitated, slowly raising his hand to his ear. The man gave him a blank look, watching him intently. "I'll be okay," Etho said to Beef, and tugged the wire out of his ear. Beef's pleas for Etho to not hang up fell on deaf ears as he clicked the radio off. The man held out his hand, and Etho handed over the radio. He looked at it, and a faint smile crossed his lips before he discarded it onto the table with a reprimanding glare. "So, tell me why Scar has sent a child to break into my apartment." "I'm not a child," he blurted out. Then it hit him that this was, in fact, Iscal, who referred to this place as my apartment. Etho was sitting just out of reach of a hitman who was holding a gun. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, afraid to move too much in case it pissed Iscal off. He hadn't actually threatened Etho, aside from holding a gun, but he didn't want to take that risk. Iscal gave him an impassive stare. "Alright then, why has Scar sent you? You obviously have no idea what you're doing." Etho was about to jump to his own defense before he realized what Iscal had said. "Why has Scar sent you?" "How do you know about Scar?" "Well, I wasn't certain he was the one behind all of this, so thank you for confirming that." Etho shut his mouth and scowled. "What I want to know is what Scar wants." "Maybe you should ask him," Etho replied nervously. His mouth had gone very dry. I could, but I'm asking you. He told me, to deliver that pizza, Etho replied, jerking his head back towards the coffee table. Really? Iskall said, with a small smile on his lips. And how did you get in here? The door? The door, he muttered, reaching his hand into his pocket. Etho tensed, preparing to defend himself. Relax, Iskall said, pulling his phone out of his pocket. He dialed a number and put it on speaker. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. A familiar voice came from the other end. Well, hello there, Iskall, my old friend. What can I do for you? Etho's eyes widened, but Iskall held his hand up, motioning for silence. He was a bit clunky considering he was still holding the gun, but Etho clamped his mouth shut. Hello, Scar. I've got something exciting to tell you. Go on, Scar replied. Etho could hear the tenseness in his voice. Do you know where I am right now, Scar? You said you would be away this weekend, out on some job. That is correct, but how do you know that, Scar? You told me, of course. But I didn't, Scar. See, I told no one that I would be away this weekend on a top-secret job. Iskall paused for a moment and looked at Etho, whose stomach sank. This was bad. Iskall knew he was coming. If he got home, he was going to give Scar a piece of his mind. So, Scar, I had to postpone my incredibly important work and prepare for whatever mischief you decided to pull, and look where that's gotten us. He trailed off and held the phone out to Etho. Say hello. Hi, Scar. Iskall, No, I don't want to hear it. You and Cobb are going to sit tight, safely holed up at Concorp, where I'm sure you are, and you're going to wait. There was a moment of silence, disrupted by some quiet bickering from the other end of the line, presumably Cobb and Scar. I'm going to talk to your little thief here, and then I'm going to send him on his way. It's up to him how nicely our conversation goes, Iskall said, giving Etho a pointed look. Etho looked away quickly. Etho, don't do anything rash. Goodbye, Scar. He sighed and slipped the phone back into his pocket. You see what I put up with? All this even after I agreed not to kill Cub. Scar said you guys are friends. Iskall raised an eyebrow to that. Friends is a very loose term. Would you really have killed Cub? Iskall waved his hand airily. Alphatech paid well, but Scar paid better. I knew he would, so I knew I would never actually have to kill Cub. Great payoff for me, though, and I didn't even have to kill anyone. Now, normally I do have to shake Scar down for answers, but I'm thinking you're going to be a lot easier. Try me, Etho said with a false sense of bravado. Iskall pointed the gun at him. Okay, all right, Etho yelled, holding his hands out to show he was unarmed. Please don't shoot me. Iskall rolled his eye and lowered the gun. Why did Scar send you? Etho looked at him nervously. Iskall had a relaxed disposition, but something about his posture told Etho he wouldn't hesitate to shoot him, even if that meant he had to mop blood out of the carpet. He wants information about Alphatech. So he's still working on that. And Alphatech gave me those files. Oh, those two are tricky. Etho eyed the door while Iskall spoke mostly to himself. He doubted he could make it to the door before Iskall put a bullet in his back. Iskall shifted through the papers on the table, shuffling them into a pile. You took something, he accused Etho. No, I didn't. None of your stuff looked useful to me. Iskal's organic eye widened, while the mechanical one bore into Etho's soul. "You're a good liar." Etho frowned beneath his mask and unzipped his backpack, pulling out a slightly bent file and slapping it on the table. Iskal grabbed it and started flipping through its contents. "None of this will be particularly useful to Scar. All the juicy details are redacted anyways," he said, scanning the pages. He tossed it back on the table in Etho's direction. "You're letting me take this?" "I don't like Alpha Tech. They won't be happy with you." "They're already going to be mad that I refused to kill Cub. What are a few missing files to them? They're redacted anyways." "Do you have anything else?" Etho asked hopefully. "I'll be honest, they didn't give me much of anything helpful. That file," he said, gesturing to the one Etho was holding, "is full of information we already know about beacons. I'm sure the redacted bits have more." Etho looked at the file in his hands. Project T was a person. It wasn't a question. Iskal gave him an impassive look. "Yes." "Do you know him?" "I've heard of him. You probably have too. The media calls him Blaze." Blaze. The name did ring a bell. He popped up from time to time, caused a bit of chaos, then vanished once more. Etho had vague memories of seeing blurred photos of him, quite literally wreathed in flames. "Yeah, I've heard of him. So he escaped from Alpha Tech?" "Yep. He's been quiet ever since, but he pops up from time to time, messes with Alpha Tech a bit, then goes back into hiding." "Hiding?" "Let me give you a bit of advice. Alpha Tech doesn't like to lose what they consider to be their property. I'd steer clear from them if I were you." Etho nodded slowly. Iskal was giving him the same warnings that Scar had, which didn't make him feel any better now that he was probably on Alpha Tech's bad side. Hopefully they didn't find out he was the thief. "Do you have anything else?" Etho asked nervously. Iskal shook his head. "They didn't give me much. I don't even think they know Cub's power, so it's not like they could give me any of those details. Not that it would be helpful anyways." "Do you know Cub's power?" Iskal grinned at him in response. "You should be on your way. Your buddies are probably having a heart attack right now." Etho had forgotten he had left all of them hanging. They probably thought something terrible happened. He hoped they wouldn't do anything stupid. His time with Iskal had gone shockingly well, and he didn't want to blow it now. "Right," Etho said, standing slowly because Iskal was still holding a gun. "Now, we've never met before, and you've never heard of anyone named Iskal, got it?" he said with a pointed look, and Etho nodded hastily. "Good. If you want my advice, get as far away from all of this as you can. Don't let Scar drag you into any more crime. If I had it my way, I would have retired a long time ago." "Why don't you?" Iskal shrugged. "Once you're in, you're in. You hit a point where you can't really turn back." I hope you figure this out." Iskal gave him a fond look, which was perhaps the most emotion Etho had seen on his face. "You're a good kid. Now go on," he said, making a shooing motion with his hand. "I've got work to do." "See you around," he replied cheekily. "You better hope not," Iskal called as Etho shut the door behind him. The weight of the previous few minutes came crashing down, and Etho walked in a daze over to the elevator. He was clutching the file to his chest, both arms wrapped around it like someone might try and take it off of him. Belatedly, he realized his hood was down, so he tugged it up and over his head before exiting the elevator. No one so much as glanced in his direction as he left the lobby and headed back onto the street. Etho dashed to the alleyway where beat-ups had parked. The rain had slowed down, which was good considering he was carrying the paper file. Beef launched himself out of the car the second Etho came around the corner. "Etho! What the hell was that?" he yelled, crushing him into a hug. Air, Etho croaked, and Beef finally released him. I'm alright. Let's do this in the car. B-Dubs had come over at some point in their reunion, and the three of them walked back to the car together. It took a few minutes and much cursing for B-Dubs to finally start the thing, but then they were on their way home. Well, not home, but Concorp, which they had all spent so much time at the past week that it was close enough. Etho handed Beef the file from Iskall and gave them the details of the encounter. They interjected from time to time. Apparently, as soon as he switched off the radio, they had called Scar and barely had time to explain the situation before Iskall called Scar. And Scar was telling us to stop freaking out and that Iskall wasn't going to hurt you? B-Dubs ranted, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel as he drove. But we didn't believe him, obviously, Beef continued, flipping intently through the file. So Beef said he's going in there, right? B-Dubs said. But I'm like, that's a terrible idea. What are you gonna do to an assassin? And you wanna know what this guy says to me? Listen, Beef began. He says, I'll knock his teeth in, and then pulls out a freaking baseball bat. You brought a baseball bat? Etho asked with disbelief, turning around in his seat to look at Beef. You never know what you might need, Beef said in his own defense. You were going into a dangerous situation. It seemed like a good idea. I thought I was going to have to chase after him. He was ready to come get you. Etho laughed, but he was really touched. He really didn't deserve Beef as a friend. He was the best. Thanks. Thank you both, actually. I couldn't have done any of this without you. We're a team. We've got your back, B-Dubs said. Etho smiled fondly beneath the mask. The three of them really did make a pretty good team. He had known Beef all his life, so it was no surprise that they worked well together. And despite the fact that he just met B-Dubs, he felt like the three of them had known each other for years. Have you read this? Beef asked from the back. No, I skimmed the first page. Why? It's interesting, Beef replied. I mean, it's really messed up what they did to this guy. They seemed pretty ruthless. They're trying to figure out if they could remove his beacon abilities. Really? Etho asked. Why would anyone want to do that? It wasn't a happy thought. Even though he had just gotten his powers, he wouldn't like to lose them. It would be like losing a piece of himself. I'm not sure. It's weird. It's hard to tell. A lot of this is redacted. The more I hear about Alpha Tech, the more I hate them, B-Dubs said with a frown. Seriously, how are these guys still in business? Money, probably, Etho replied. I hope Scar can stop them, Beef agreed. Maybe this file will be helpful? He didn't sound very hopeful. I think it's going to take more than a file to prove all the stuff they're behind, Etho said. I think that Scar was probably expecting a lot more than that. Either way, both Scar and Iskall have warned me about them, and if this file's any indication, then we know they're not friendly towards beacons. I'm staying out of it. Beef nodded. Yeah, as much fun as this turned out to be, it was very stressful. I just get coffee and file papers, B-Dubs said. Scar's never had me do anything like this before. It'll be our first and last job then, Etho agreed. And now we have a 100% success rate. Congratulations, everyone. The car was filled with an excited cheering. Beef pulled out his phone and began taking a picture of each page from the file. Dude, aren't those like top secret or something? Etho asked, glancing back to see what he was doing. Hey, Scar doesn't have to know, and we've already stolen them. What are they going to do? Be more mad? Etho shrugged, and before he knew it, they were pulling into the Concorp garage. It was after hours, so the building was mostly abandoned as they made their way inside. Cub had given each of them a card to access the building, with the promise that they wouldn't wander off like vagrant rapscallions. The sounds of muffled voices came from the conference room as they entered. Cub was yelling at someone on the phone, a hand tugging at his hair. Scar was hunched over a laptop holding a cup of coffee. They both gaped at the trio as they entered. I'm gonna have to call you back, Cub said, hastily hanging up the call. Scar beamed at them. See, Cub, they're fine. I told you Iskall wouldn't— Did you know? Etho hissed, taking a step towards Scar. He was overcome with a sudden rush of anger, vision going red. Did you fucking know that Iskall was going to be there? No more bullshit, Scar. You owe me one last truth from our game. Scar paled considerably, mouth open in silent shock. Beef grabbed Etho by the shoulder and held him back from doing something he regretted. Etho panted, trying to collect himself. He had time to cool off in the car, but seeing Scar brought all that rage back up to the surface. Etho was pissed. He was out here risking his life, and if Scar was treating it like a game— Sorry, he said with a wince. No. Scar stopped him, holding up his hands. You have every right to be mad. Things didn't go exactly as we planned. To answer your question, no. We truly thought Iskall wasn't going to be home, he said, locking eyes with Etho. Still shaking, Etho sat down, B-Dubs and Beef taking chairs on either side of him. Are the three of you all right? Physically, I mean, Cub asked after Etho gave him a withering glare. We're fine. I didn't even need the gas mask, actually. Good. That's good, Cub said with a nod. Etho gave them an abridged version of what happened, because he had already explained it once today, and that was plenty. If they had further questions, they could ask him another time. Beef passed over the file Iskall had turned over. Scar opened it eagerly while Cub looked over his shoulder. Sky's eyes widened as they scanned the first page. We can use this, he said softly. It's not definite proof, but it will still help our case. Do you think he can? Cub said, trailing off and looking at Scar, who nodded in reply. Etho watched the two of them have a silent conversation. That's it then, he asked. I risk my life to get you one maybe useful file. Now what? This is helpful, trust me, Scar replied. And now, if AlphaTech ever finds out you're a beacon, they wouldn't dare go after you, not since you're working for us. You've helped us, protected yourself, and made a decent amount of money along the way. Etho had almost forgotten about Scar's promise to pay his tuition. It didn't make him feel any better now, but it would pay off when he didn't have to make the next payment. You're sure AlphaTech won't come after me? Iskall, he said some things, told me to steer clear of them. They won't, Cub promised, unless they want the entirety of Concorp to come down on them. You can come by my office tomorrow, tell me anything you've forgotten, and we'll get any last-minute paperwork squared away, Scar said. And you, he pointed at B-Dubs with a grin, can go back to what I pay you to do. Well, it was a pleasure working with you guys, Etho said, rising to his feet. Cub raised an eyebrow, but didn't call Etho out on his sarcasm. He means that nicely, B-Dubs said, with a serious look on his face. I'm always nice, B-Dubs. I'll see you guys around, I guess, he said with a wave to Cub and Scar. Scar waved back, and Etho could see a faint smile on Cub's lips. Etho convinced B-Dubs to stop at a gas station on the way home, because they were all hungry. And if that gas station just so happened to be located right next to a liquor store, then, well, it was probably just pure coincidence. The lady at the front desk eyed the three of them suspiciously as they made their way into the building. They were a sight to behold, with Beef carrying a baseball bat, massive backpack, and a bottle of orange juice, followed by B-Dubs weighed down with bags of candy and snacks. Etho brought up the rear, carrying half the liquor store with him, taking care not to drop any of the bottles. He also had insisted on wearing the gas mask, because he hadn't gotten to that day, and he wasn't about to let all of Cub's hard work go to waste. That, and it looked badass, of course. Their apartment was in the same disarray that they left it in, so they didn't bother unpacking everything neatly. The three of them spent the rest of the night partying themselves straight into oblivion. So the heist is done. We still have 9 more chapters to go. I'm sure those are just fun, light-hearted chapters where nothing bad happens. Also, school just started for me by the time I'm recording this, and that means that probably means there will be less sound effects in this podfic, and I might miss some updates. If I do, that's because of classes. Anyways, this story was not written by me, it was written by Boxmaker. You can find their works in Archive of Our Own. You can also find this story, the podfic version of this story, on AO3. The link's down in the description. The sound effects used in this video, most of them aren't mine. The fan art also isn't mine either. Proper credits for those are also in the description. And I hope you all liked this chapter. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.